I've worked with some crazy people in the food service industry, but no one can compete with the guy I'm about to tell you about. I've been working at this specific Mexican place for a little over 2 years, and one of our employees quit out of nowhere. So we hired someone pretty fast. It probably would have been better to get someone with a little more experience. But I was also involved in the hiring process, and he seemed fine. We needed someone quickly, and we only had one applicant. He started this shift the Saturday after his interview, and because it was busy during the lunch rush, we had him do dishes. There was no time to train him to cook that day. And this may seem weird to other people who work in a restaurant. But at ours, we don't have someone who only does dishes. We all help out with them when anyone has a free moment. The only problem with that was that the new guy, David, absolutely despised doing dishes. I do get it though. It's not fun, and no one likes that part of the job. But he made sure to let everyone know just how angry he was. He'd stand in the back doing dishes, and then slam them down in the sink and throw them onto the shelf. To the point where the noise had started to actually scare the customers. He was asked to stop, and he did for around 30 minutes, and then went back to throwing the dishes around and cussing about how much he hated his life. It was incredibly cringe. But we needed the help, so we couldn't afford to fire him over getting frustrated. This particular day, I decided to sit outside to eat my lunch, and where I was sitting faced the parking lot. I don't think David realized that I was sitting outside because when he went out to take a smoke break, he opened the front door the restaurant slammed to close behind him and then made a gun shape with his hand and shoved it in his mouth and acted like he was shooting itself in the head. And then on his way to his car, he started yelling to himself about how much he hated this place. My mouth was just hanging open to the sight of this guy having some tantrum like he was a big baby. And it only got worse though. His car was facing directly where I was sitting. So I got to watch him as he got inside his car and slammed the door and then proceeded to scream, thrash around and slap himself in the face for around 3 minutes straight. The worst part is I'm not even exaggerating. This guy was not. And I felt like it was on something. I went inside and told my co-workers about it. And one of them said that he wasn't even surprised. I was confused and asked her why. And she said that she had worked with him and another restaurant a couple of years earlier, and that he had been fired for that kind of behavior and that I should be careful and do what I could to avoid them. In the meantime, I was concerning. So I went to the owner, who basically said that it is what it is. And if he's not hurting anyone, he wasn't just going to fire him. I think his exact words were, "We all have bad days." This was worse than a bad day though. It ended up being a horrible and disgusting 2 months working with this man. He started training to the outline cook around 2 weeks after he started working with us. I thought that was kind of gross, considering that he had some of the worst hygiene I've ever seen. He reeked of cigarettes and longest hair and horribly disgusting long and dirty fingernails that just seemed to get worse as the days went by. It was so bad, his nails would pop through his gloves constantly, and he didn't even care. He would only change them when someone else noticed and actually asked him. The things I mentioned so far don't seem that bad, but it's what he did next. That brought it to a whole other level. I got this feeling that he started to feel like he could do anything he wanted and wouldn't be fired since he got away with so much up until that point. We didn't have a large staff, so he was left alone to cook sometimes. And that's when we started getting a lot of complaints about the food. A lot of people would find hairs and say their food didn't taste right. We even had one guy tell us that he was 100% positive that there was spit in his beans. And let me tell you, you really look like if we were lucky enough to talk him out of calling the police, instead gave him a voucher for free food for 6 months, we decided it would be best not to leave David alone in the kitchen anymore. But that really seemed to upset him. He wasn't a team player at all. My manager was given the okay by our owner to do whatever it took to make him quit. Basically just make his life miserable. We could have him fired, but I guess there's more paperwork involved when you fire someone. So David was told to do dishes all day, spray out the trash cans, clean the grease trap, scrub the floors, basically just all the gross stuff no one else wanted to do. I thought he was creepy and scary enough already. But the second we started giving him the gross jobs, he became almost evil. I bring him dishes, and he just straight up yell at me that I was an idiot and even started making fun of the way I looked. I really didn't understand the hostility towards me. But whatever. I stopped interacting with him at all. At one point, it became obvious when any of my co-workers had just been talking to David because they will come out of the back almost in tears. The guy was ruthless. The last day he ever worked with us, he did something so gross that we ended up having to get the police involved. He had cooked that day because one of her other line cooks called out. I was standing in front of the restaurant when he walked in, and I noticed him holding a water bottle behind his back. It was filled with a yellow substance, but I figured maybe he had a drink powder or something. And if he went back and washed his hands, which was a shocker in itself because he usually had to be told to do that. I didn't see his water bottle after that. The day went on. And for dinner, we had a special that was a broth-based soup. I was waiting tables and was confused when literally anyone who had ordered the soup complained that it tasted terrible. I told her manager, who tried the soup and agreed, and only when he said, "Oh, this tastes like piss." Because I put two and two together. And I started screaming, "Oh my God," over and over again. I didn't even know what to say. Everyone was asking me what I was freaking out about. And when I looked over at David, he looked at me with wide eyes and mouthed the word "now." They looked over at him when they saw my eyes dart over to him. And that's when he decided to try to make a break for it. The only problem was the way out of the kitchen was directly through us. So when he lunged forward, my manager just threw him to the ground. Finally, I was able to tell them when I saw, and there was zero hesitation, to call the police. They arrived and quickly found the bottle David had brought in, and it was indeed full of his urine. He was arrested and the soup was tested and unfortunately was tainted with his bodily fluid. The restaurant was closed for a while after that, and I just quit before it even reopened. I decided an office job was more suitable for me than that. David was charged with tampering of consumer products and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I was actually glad that he got prison time. And honestly, I think he deserves it. Hopefully when he gets out, he's not someone to have to encounter ever again. My friend and I decided to get something to eat at a restaurant down the street from where we worked. She was 22. At the time when I was 24. We were in no way involved in a romantic relationship. But we were commonly mistaken as a couple constantly. We didn't mind since it wasn't that serious. That night, though, would prove to be different. We got to the restaurant and around 8 p.m. and were looking forward to a nice dinner and drinks. We were seated and given our menus and a little piece of paper with some questions on it. It was one of those things where you sign up for this newsletter from the restaurant and you're entered to win a free meal for two. I wasn't interested. But my friend Allison was, and she filled out the little paper and gave it to our waiter, and she came over to get our drink orders. She had put her phone number and address down in case she won the second and was handed over. We didn't think about it again. Out of sight, out of mind, I guess. We ordered our drinks and were talking for a little while when Allison got a text on her phone. It said something about how gorgeous she looked that night. And that this person texting her thought that she looked better and read. I saw the look on her face as she read the text, and she handed me the phone immediately so I could see it. I didn't like the thought of someone we didn't know creeping out my friend like that. We looked around to try to figure out if maybe it was one of our friends who was in the restaurant just messing around with us. But no one we knew was there. I was starting to get angry. But Allison told me to calm down. And it wasn't such a big deal with the text being harmless. I brushed it off and we continued with our dinner. We ordered our food and around 5 minutes after getting it she got another text. This time it wasn't so innocent. It detailed how much this person loved watching her eat her food and that it was turning them on. She choked reading ads, and it was disturbing to see the message myself even as someone that text wasn't even aimed at. And that's when we started to get really concerned. She tried calling the number because clearly it was from someone in the restaurant. But no phone rang. She just wanted to, and I agreed that that would be the best decision. I called the waiter over and asked for the check while also explaining what was going on. I didn't know if all women in the restaurant were at risk of getting those creepy texts. So warning her was something that I thought was the right thing to do. She thanked me for telling her and apologized profusely that someone was there harassing us and told us that she'd get our check settled as fast as possible. While we were sitting there waiting, another text came in. This time it was about how Allison deserves someone better than that ugly beta sitting next to her. Clearly talking about me. Then another came in saying that she could do so much better. And if she texted back, she could be with a real man who could take care of her and protect her. She was starting to get teary-eyed and wanted to cry. So I gave her a hug. I wanted to console her, but also wanted to get on this guy's nerves. He was clearly watching us, and I wanted to do something to provoke a reaction big enough that I could figure out who was sending her those messages. I was going to find that guy and confront him sooner or later, and I really wanted it to be sooner. Unfortunately, no matter how much I made it seem like Alice and I were some couple, nothing I did provoked a reaction from that creep. We have gotten our check back and we're about to leave when she got another text. This time, it was pictures of her from behind with a very explicit message to go along with it. And I was beyond mad. Once I saw that, I took her phone and asked for the manager. I suddenly remembered the paper that she had filled out and realized the person who was texting her had to be someone who had access to it. And because they were placed behind the bar, it had to be someone who worked there. I told the manager everything and showed him all the texts. I pretty much demanded that he find out who was sending them. He had all of the employees come up front and had them place their phones on the bar. We called a number and one of the phones lit up with a caller ID that read, "Sexy blonde," with a picture of Allison sitting at the table. The manager picked up the phone and by process of elimination, we figured out who it was. It turned out to be the bartender. He looked gross and creepy, and just like how you did expect. He had this long greasy hair tied into a man bun, temples everywhere, and a unit brown had the smirk on his face that didn't even go away when he realized that he had been found out. I walked up to him. I pushed him. I asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. But he didn't respond, only seemed to laugh and said that I just wouldn't get it because I'm beta and he's alpha. So I pushed him again. And that time, he didn't find it so funny. The manager wasn't liking the scene that was being created. So he suggested that we head into the office and sort things out there. And once we were in the room, I demanded that he delete every picture that he took of her. But he seemed to refuse. He said that it was a man's right to take what he wanted. And he wanted those pictures. So they were his. And that's when it was obvious that we had to call the police. And the second that was mentioned, he started getting more agreeable. But I thought it was too late. The manager of the restaurant called the police, and they got there probably in about 5 minutes or so. I guess that's the perk of living in the city. And unfortunately, there wasn't anything they could really do about the situation. Taking pictures of another person in the public area is creepy, but it is legal. And because nothing he said in those texts was threatening in the eyes of the law, he didn't do anything necessarily wrong. The officers left, and man, that it made that guy act even worse. He now had this mentality like he was right and we were wrong. And he was entitled to those pictures, and even more, he started telling Allison that he'd get a one way or another and one day she'd be his. And I wanted to beat him up right there, but didn't want to be the one going to jail that night. And I really do wish I could say that there was a good outcome of what had happened. But not much was done. He was fired, which obviously was a step in the right direction. But I wish the police would have done something. He didn't text Allison again, which we were both relieved about. It's just sad that people have this mentality where violating someone's sense of security is not only okay, but they're right. Let's get one thing straight here, though. You're not enough. Ask anyone working in fast food if it's something they enjoy, and the answer will always be no. Their reasons might not be as concerning as mine, but the opinion is usually the same. I was 20 years old and had just gotten a job at a local fast food place. That wasn't one of those chain restaurants. So that also meant that it wasn't run very well. Only on my third day, I was left alone after 8 p.m. to close the restaurant by myself. I didn't like the feeling of being there alone. But it was a pretty small town. And there was only 3 hours left on my shift. I was waiting at the counter for someone to come in and order something, but no one came in for at least an hour after being there alone. I heard the door open and the bell that was hanging on the handle started to ding. I looked up from my phone and my heart dropped just a little. Standing only a few feet away from me was a very large, very disheveled, seemingly homeless man. Now don't judge me for being scared. Most young women are scared of the presence of really any guy, let alone one who looks like he's been living on the streets for half a decade. I was of course still very polite to him. He walked up to the counter and I had to hold off from gagging at the smell radiating off his body. He was very soft-spoken, which eased my nerves a little bit. Still felt uneasy about the situation. He ordered a burger and fries, and I got to making it right away. As I walked a couple of steps back into the kitchen, he must have taken notice that I didn't call the order out for anyone else to make it. "You here alone tonight, sweetie?" And my whole body lit up with chills. I told him of course I wasn't there alone and that my co-workers were just having a smoke break up back. But he didn't buy it though. "Really?" "Because I was just back there. Is nobody back there?" "Don't lie to me, darling." I started to get extremely uncomfortable and wanted nothing more than for this man to just get out of the restaurant and leave me alone. But I already knew that that wasn't going to be happening anytime soon. Thankfully, just as the homeless man began approaching the counter again, a woman and her 2 kids walked in. When he saw them, he stepped back and sat down at a table that had direct line of sight into the kitchen. I guess he wanted to make sure that he could see me at all times, and let me tell you, having his eyes constantly on me did not feel good. I was thoroughly terrified and creeped out, but he hadn't done anything wrong, so I couldn't ask him to leave. The woman ordered food for herself and her children, and I was praying the whole time that she'd just get it for dine-in, but I guess I just couldn't be that lucky. She got it as takeout, and I know it wasn't the best thing to do, but I spent as long as humanly possible making her food. I finished the man's food first and called his name and pick up from the counter. He rushed over so we could get to it when I was still close, and he did something so gross that I really can't tell you the reason. Just as I was setting the tray down on the counter, he leaned over it and breathed heavily in my face. This time, I could not suppress the gag. In fact, I started dry heaving. He wasn't even offended though. They actually kind of smirked like he was happy about what he did, and that it was somehow an attractive thing. The woman asked if I was okay, and I told her was fine. I knew I didn't want her to leave. But there was nothing I could really do to get her to stay. I got her food bagged up with a call of her name and thanking her for her visit. She was out the door and gone. Around again, aren't we? I backed away from the counter when I noticed the man approaching it yet again. He smiled this wide, creepy smile, and I hated every second of it. His teeth were yellow and chipped, and I really didn't want to experience that smell again. So I backed away even more. He leaned over the counter and just stared at me. And that's when I finally built up the courage to ask him to leave. We're actually going to be closing the restaurant early that night. So if you don't mind just collecting your belongings and exiting, that'd be great. I really tried to sound as nice and calm as possible. I didn't want to show any fear and make myself seem vulnerable in any way. He didn't refuse. And to my surprise, he actually did leave. I washed out the windows as he walked down the street and into the dark out of sight. I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. I quickly went back into the office and grabbed the keys. I practically ran to the front door and locked it. I was so happy that I was locked in and no one could get to me. I didn't care if I got fired. I was closing and going home where I knew I'd be safe. I was wiping down the cutting boards and singing a song to myself when I heard a crashing sound come from the front lobby. Like one of the windows had just shattered. Freaked out, I had an idea of what just happened, but I wasn't about to go look. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that the man had come back and I had to hide. I had this thing where every time I entered the building, I would think of an escape plan of somewhere to hide, and the restaurant wasn't any different. I wasn't going out the back exit in case someone was there waiting for me. So I went to the one place that I knew that I could hide where no one would find me. I grabbed my puffy jacket and went inside the walk-in freezer and shut the door behind me as quietly as I could. In the back right corner, there was a small space next to the roll-away metal shelving that I could barely squeeze into. But I managed. The boxes of burger patties and frozen fries covered most where I was hiding. I crouched down to the point that I was sitting and holding my legs tight against my body, and I planned to stay there like that until I knew that it was safe to leave. I heard grunting outside the freezer door and things being moved around. I was in there for about 20 minutes, and I hoped that ordeal would be over soon. I was literally shaking from fear and probably the cold, but was grateful whoever it was that was out there hadn't found me yet. But that gratitude wouldn't last. I sucked in a deep breath as I heard the walk-in door open. I peeked through the shelves and saw the same boots and pants that homeless man was wearing. I held my breath and did everything not to make any noise at all. My heart raced so fast, there was literally holding back tears, felt like I was gonna pass out. "Baby girl. Are you in here, that he just wants to talk? I know you need a cuddle." And his voice was no longer soft, but loud and desperate. I wish I could explain the horror that I felt in that moment. But no words would be able to describe it. I quietly let out the breath, and it was holding in and prayed to God that he wouldn't hear it. And thankfully, he didn't. He exited the walk-in and left the door open, letting some of the coldness out with it. I heard the sound of glass cracking and figured that that meant that he was crawling back through the window that he had broken. But it didn't matter. I had no plans to leave that spot until I knew for sure that I wasn't in any more danger. And before anyone asked why I didn't call the police. This was a time before cell phones. And I wasn't about to just get up and use the landline and possibly be seen in that moment. The wall can stop being cold, and I ended up falling asleep in that position. I woke up to the sound of people talking on the feet from where I was still hiding. I looked through the shelves and was so happy to see my manager and a police officer standing there over me. And by that time, my legs had actually gone completely numb from the position that I was sitting in, and only could do was kind of call out for help. They were shocked to see me back there. And they did help me out. The officer sat me down in the lobby, and I told him everything. And he promised me that they keep an eye on for the man that I described. But he couldn't make any promises on catching him. I quit that job right then and there, and hadn't stepped foot in that building since. Thank Christ. I never saw that man again, which I was grateful for. But I was also disappointed the police never really even seemed to make an attempt to find him. I eventually ended up going to therapy for a while, because I stopped sleeping and eating from this kind of trauma. I can easily say now that I have moved on. I don't like thinking about it. But telling others a story has given me some sort of weird sense of closure. My one piece of advice to others is to always have an exit strategy wherever you go, or at least a really good place to hide. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations.